to have you with us again today. This event is part of our lecture series, but it's a special day in which we are honoring various recipients of leadership and service awards, bringing them to the campus. We've been celebrating with them during homecoming week, and it's been a wonderful couple of days and a great opportunity to hear from and to honor some marvelous people. Before we get started, and I should mention, my name is Michael Thompson. I'm the interim dean of the BYU Marriott School of Business. I've been an associate dean for many years, and I'm serving in this role until our incoming dean, Bridget Madrian, officially takes the helm on January 1. So we're in an exciting transition period right now in the BYU Marriott School. Before we officially begin, we have invited Mariah Lee, who hails from Wyoming, to offer our opening prayer. Mariah.
Our dear, kind, gracious Heavenly Father, we are so very grateful for the opportunity that we have to be here today on this beautiful campus, and we are grateful for the opportunity that we have to hear from Ron today, and ask that we will be able to take what we learn and be able to apply it to our lives and be able to become better leaders and servers in our community. We're grateful for all that Thou blesses us with each and every day, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thanks, Mariah. Thank you, Mariah. If I seem a little bit rattled this morning, it's because I am. We had something come up that Cheryl Macbeth and I lose sleep over from time to time. When we invite people to speak in this lecture series, some of them come from significant distances, so we always are a little concerned, this is usually during the winter, that they're going to have travel problems. Well, that's what happened. We're scheduled to hear from Ron Haas, who has been an absolutely extraordinary leader and has been an extraordinary supporter of the BYU Marriott School and its students. He is currently a partner at PwC, doing some very exciting work, heading up their massive global, essentially talent management initiative. He's a person who's helping design a process to develop leaders and to develop them rapidly and effectively enough in the company that the very finest and most effective of these leaders can become partners in the firm that he works in, PwC, a global company that has done some marvelous things around leadership development and communication, and some just very good consulting work across the world. We have here today Janice Haas. We have Ron's wife here. We have their wonderful daughter, Renee. We don't have Ron. However, in a conversation late yesterday, Ron said, "Look, Michael, I've got this problem. It's a combination of weather and a mechanical problem with the plane, the flight I was scheduled on. And at first it was, I feel terrible. I've looked forward to this for months." But he called me back a few minutes later and he said, look, I am stuck in Singapore. And by the way, I think that's 14 hours later. I think it's midnight right now, 5 minutes after midnight in Singapore. He said, "I've got access to PwC's video conferencing system here in Singapore in the PwC office. So I'm gonna plan to just get online, and if all goes well, the students are going to be able to see me, they're going to be able to hear me, and after I give the material that I presented, then maybe we'll have some time for Q&A. So, thanks to the microelectronics revolution and a lot of other technological changes that have happened over the last 20 years, it looks like we are going to be able to hear from Ron Haas. I'm not going to take a lot of time saying more about his career. He is remarkable. I've known this man for years, and I've watched him interact with people, and I've learned from him, and he's marvelous. So, let's just hope that all goes well, and in just a moment, we'll hope to have Ron Haas up here on the screen.
How about physically?
Oh, hey!
How are you? That was a quick flight.
Yeah, that was a trick. We set you up, and Ron's going to explain why that happened. Let me say just a couple more things. First, I would so much prefer to have the embodied Ron Haas in the room with us than to watch him on the screen. Though, if we had to settle for on the screen, we would take it. A couple more things. Recently, our president talked about, and a wonderful journalist who writes for the New York Times, David Brooks, who talked about resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And the resume virtues, you know what those are. This man has a resume that most of us would, sort of die to have. And that's great, and we could go on and on about what he has done in his career since graduating from the accounting program and being in the first cohort of students to take the notorious junior core.
How many are in the junior core right now?
Most
Okay.
of these students
They're
are
past that.
Well, are younger than
Younger
that.
than
Yeah. And it goes on and on. So, those are the resume virtues. And you'll see the fruits of some of Ron's great professional experience as he shares his message. But there are also the eulogy virtues, okay? Let's skip ahead to Ron Haas's funeral. Alas, someday that will come. I'll have a funeral. Ron, we'll all have a funeral. Guess what people are going to talk about at Ron Haas's funeral? They're not going to be talking about the resume virtues. They're going to be talking about the more significant qualities of this man's life. His character, his integrity, his service, his family, and there's so much to say about that. He and Janice have brought 8 children into the world, but after that process had unfolded and the kids were getting older, they adopted 2 beautiful little boys.
I need to make a correction. We brought 6 into the world,
Oh.
and then we adopted 2.
That's the
6.
words of the mother.
I'm so glad you're here, Janice, to keep me on track. But not only this family, but the service that they've done in the church and in the whatever community they've lived in has just been extraordinary. I could go on, but I'm not going to because I'm taking time away from this man. Ron, we are thrilled to have you with us, and we're eager to learn from you.
Thanks, Michael. I
Thanks for
appreciate
coming from Singapore.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. Well, students, it's great to be with you today. We had a little bit of fun to start this out because our topic today is the human connection in the digital world. And let me just ask you a quick question. How did you feel when Dean Thompson said he's not going to be here, but we're going to be able to join him via video conference? Be honest, yeah.
Very disappointed.
Yeah. Like, why am I here? I could have done this at home. I didn't even have to dress up for this. I could have done this in my pajamas, right? Why did I even come? What else? Yes?
I'm still happy that we could interact,
Yeah.
even though I would rather have a warm interaction.
Interesting. So there's a difference between a digital interaction and a human interaction then, is what you're saying. Okay, any other thoughts? Yes?
Nervous that it wasn't going to work with video or audio or something like that.
Yeah, so is technology perfect? No, it's not. But you're growing up as a generation that has engaged with technology from the very beginning. From the very beginning of your arrival on this planet. You're what we call digital natives, right? When I started my career, we didn't even have email. I left BYU in 1993, And I remember getting my first computer. My first computer, I was at Deloitte at the time, was this big, and the screen was this big. And it was black with green writing on it. And they called it the sewing machine. And you almost had to have a dolly to get this thing around. I remember so excited when I got the note in my mailbox at the firm that we've got a computer for you. And I said, oh, this is great. And I went, and I literally broke my back taking the thing to the car. And then I was able to upgrade to what we called the lunchbox. That was made by Compaq. It was about this big, and you broke off the keyboard down, and then there was a screen just a little bit bigger, but it was gray with orange writing. And I thought I'd really made it, right? Because I had the lunchbox. This other poor guy has got the sewing machine, as we call it. So the point is that you're growing up in an age that is just accelerating. You know that. There's some great content out there entitled Did You Know? It's put together by a group called Shift Happens. Let me pronounce that very carefully. Shift with an F, happens. Okay, and I would invite you to watch it in the interest of time. But it goes through a whole series of statistics about how the world is fundamentally changing around us and changing so fast that the ability for humans to adapt to that is becoming even more and more and more of a challenge. So we can't necessarily slow down Moore's law, right? The whole notion that computing power doubles every 2 years, we're seeing that, right? We're living that. So if computing power is going like this, and the curve for human adaptability is much more flat, we have now probably in the last 5 years crossed over the point where human adaptability is below the curve of computing power and technology innovation. And so we can't slow down technology. So the only other option is to try and take that fairly flat curve of human adaptability and make it more steep. So how do you do that? How do you train people and get people to think about working in a digital world and maintaining a human connection? So that's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes. And hopefully the technology works. This is from that video. Did you know that we're preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist? Using technologies that have not yet been invented and to solve problems that we don't even know are problems yet. There's some statistics that say that technology is changing so quickly and the amount of data and information available to us is changing so fast that by the time a student gets to their junior year, a third of what they learned in the first 2 years is already outdated. Now, this says nothing about your professors and others. That's not what I'm saying, okay? The point is it's happening so fast. How do you keep pace in an environment that's going faster and faster? And how do you maintain this notion of a human connection? So let's give you a quick example. Artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is already around us. Autonomous vehicles, digital assistants, and the like. If we define this in a really simple way, that is technologies that can understand, learn, and then act based on data, there's a lot of people that would say, wow, this is going to take over my job. This is going to obliterate the need for certain roles. And I would submit that before we jump to that conclusion, that we step back and we ask ourselves the following questions. What do machines do best? What do machines really do best? Things like repetitive tasks, analyzing large amounts of data, and so forth. On the flip side, what do humans do best? They resolve ambiguous problems and information. They exercise judgment related to something. And they make people feel understood. Humans can exercise empathy or compassion, and they can influence someone emotionally, right? Machine can't do that. And so this whole notion of are all the jobs going to go away because of AI, really in the end is that AI's greatest power is not necessarily replacing us, but complementing what we do, augmenting and extending your capabilities as a human. There's a great article a couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal. It was on a Saturday. It was by the former head of Google China. I think it was on September 24th. It was in the Saturday edition. It was in the essay section of the Wall Street Journal. I would refer you to it to read it. It's really good about talking about this whole notion of augmenting human capability and not replacing it. And the fact that emotional connections are still an important aspect of business. Okay? So when you think about human connection in a digital world, it begs the question, what is the human connection? And so let's peel this back just a little bit and start talking about it. Is it followers on Instagram? Is it the number of friends you have on Facebook? Is it connections on LinkedIn? You can read the list. Is it a video conference that we were supposedly going to have? Is it a handwritten note that someone writes to you? I was on an airplane the other day coming back from New York to Dallas, and at the end of the flight attendant handed me this card. And it said, "Dear Mr. Haas, I hope you enjoyed flying with American Airlines. We enjoyed having you on our flight. I'm always willing to help. Dalton." Wow, has anybody ever had that happen to them?
We don't fly first class.
Oh, so good point, Ian. Right? And I thought, wow, Dalton, that was a different experience for me, wasn't it? A simple note. And I'm going to keep this as a reminder of the human connection in a digital world. How did I make my reservation? How did I check in? How did I get to the flight? I checked in because the 2D barcode was on my watch. I didn't even have to talk to a human. I just scanned it, walked on. I checked in the same way. But all of a sudden, there was a human connection between American Airlines and me through a simple card and through a handshake. So it does beg the question, what is a human connection? And it really is all of these things, isn't it? It can be all of those things. I posted on LinkedIn 3 days ago this topic. 3,500 people, as of this morning, had read it. 3,500 people had viewed it. Some of you have viewed it. Okay. How many people are in here? 120? All of a sudden, the exposure and the impact through digital can take you where you couldn't go before. But the point is not just that these are all connections, but these connections vary in the human element. The extent to which human connectivity is involved in these varies. And so the next part of our thesis here is the human connection in the digital world, and that begs the question, what's digital? I think a lot of people are using that term digital now. Well, what does it really mean? For the last 10 years, PwC has done a survey, a digital IQ survey of executives in Fortune 1000 companies. And we asked them recently, how does your organization define digital? And you can see from the responses that there are many different ways, everything from, well, it's synonymous with IT, to it's really about an experience, it's about customer-facing technology, it's about using data, it's about a mindset, it's about a shift and a change, it's about speed. So what's the definition then? And I want to sum this up in really a real simple way. I think what digital is transforming the way that an organization operates through 4 key things. Number 1, data. Data is all around us. Data around who you are, what you do, when you do it, how you do it. That's the scary part of digital, isn't it? In fact, how many people know something about me that have never met me physically? Raise your hand. Wow, are you guys digitally enabled or what? Who knows something about me that's never met me in person? Wow. Are you shy or don't know? Yes.
You were a Eagle Scout in 1984.
Wow. Where did you get that?
LinkedIn.
What else? What else about me? Yes.
Well, you worked at Deloitte, but you actually said that. But it's also on LinkedIn.
But you saw that. Okay. What else? Tell me about me. Okay. I don't know if it's that you don't want to talk or that you don't know. But let's assume for a minute that you don't know. That's a problem. Okay? There isn't a meeting I go to that I don't try and understand a little bit about that person before I show up. And guess what? They're doing the same thing. They're doing the exact same thing. Because one of the things we're going to talk about here in a minute is digital has its place. But if it's only digital and you never show up, first of all, how are you showing up digitally? And then how are you showing up physically? Both are complementary. Digital's not going to go away, and I'm not suggesting it should or would, or even could for that matter. okay? But there's a connection and a relationship between the two of these. It relates to an experience that somebody has. And it relates to innovative technology, all done in an agile and rapid way. That's digital, okay? So if that's the case, then what does this mean for business? Well, first of all, what is business? Business is really an organized effort of individuals to produce and sell a product or service for a profit. Very simple definition, right? You're all in the business school. You understand that concept. But not only for a profit, but there's also lots of entities whose sole purpose in life is to achieve a certain mission or purpose, perhaps a not-for-profit, right? That's a business. That's an entity. How many times do you hear yourself saying, we do business with one another? You heard that statement before? We say that a lot, don't we? What that really means is establishing and maintaining emotional connections with another person. That's what business is. Business is relationships. Business is connections. It's not a mistake that LinkedIn calls that connections, because that's really how it works. Your connections with one another. The point is what role does digital play in establishing those connections? How does that work? A couple of studies, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because I want to get to this notion of how I show up physically. But I think it's very important that you show up digitally first, and this is why. Survey conducted on behalf of Career Builder in early 2018 of this year by Harris Polling, surveyed over 1,000 HR hiring managers across Fortune 500 companies, and here's a couple of the statistics from that survey. 57% of those hiring managers are likely to interview a candidate, or excuse me, are not likely to less likely to interview a candidate they can't find online. Interesting. That implies what? Yes? They're looking for you. Right? Are you there? Are you in places where they can find you? 70% of employers use social media to screen candidates. That's up from 60% in 2016 and 11% in 2006. That's a pretty steep curve, isn't it? 61% of employers conduct social screenings to look for information supporting a candidate's qualifications. About 2 years ago, our firm had an opportunity to implement an ERP solution. It was about a $20 million opportunity with a client. We brought in on the 11th hour an individual who was an expert in this particular platform. They had a great meeting with the buyers and the key influencers at the client. This person wowed them. He wasn't in the proposal to begin with because he'd recently joined the firm. But we thought, this guy is perfect. Let's get him right in front of the client. He can have the conversation. He can close this deal. And he did a phenomenal job. After the meeting, the client went out and looked at his digital footprint. And nothing that he had talked about in the meeting with regard to his expertise related to the platform of their choice, related to some of the disciplines that he had talked about and presented himself as an expert in, appeared anywhere. We lost the project. $20 million. We asked why. Well, your so-called expert that came in, he's talking about this platform, but you're telling us that he's an expert in this platform. Which is it? We don't know what to believe. People are looking. People are trying to understand who you are by your digital footprint. Finally, 50% want to ensure that the candidate has a professional online persona. Again, what do you look like professionally? 54% decided not to hire a candidate based on their social media profiles. Now, I know the following question is, well, do you guys do that? I will tell you this, that next week when I'm here for interviews, I will know you before you come into the room. I'm not going to enter a meeting blind. And I would suggest that you not enter a meeting blind either. Okay? All right, so how are you showing up digitally? That's the question I would pose to you. Next point, what about B2B purchasing? This is a really interesting set of statistics from multiple sources. 94% of B2B buyers start conducting research online as part of the buying process. 94%, that's where they start. They don't call you up and say, hey, can you come and talk to me about what you do? They research first. So by the time that you actually show up, they have already gathered a bunch of information about who you are, what your company does, what they're good at, the references you have, the prior clients that you have. Again, the point is, as a business, how are you showing up digitally? How would a B2B purchasing agent or other influencer or buyer at an organization what would they find out about your organization and about what you feel that you're good at? Okay, so what does all this mean? Here's a couple of key takeaways. I think I need to stay closer so that this will actually work. My profession is highly dependent upon interaction, highly dependent upon building relationships of trust. And so a digital presence may get me noticed. It may even get me invited to a meeting. It may get me disinvited to meetings that I didn't even know it existed yet, right? But the point is that a physical presence provides an opportunity for me to establish an emotional connection with someone and to close a transaction. In fact, the number one word that people use after they make a decision, and then I'll speak just to the consulting space for now, is that, Ron, we really appreciate all the information you provided us, all the information that we found out, all the information that we were able to dig up. We appreciate the presentation. We appreciate your points of view. And in the end, we just felt like you were the right firm. They use that word, felt, over and over and over again. The point is that people make up their mind first, emotionally, and then they justify that decision with facts. And so when you think about that, how do you establish an emotional connection with someone in order for them to feel a certain way? Sometimes I think we're spending too much time looking down at our devices and not enough time looking up at each other. Again, the device could get you invited to the party, but whether or not you're going to get a dance depends upon how you show up and what you say when you get there. Okay? So this whole notion of interconnection is being fueled by digital, but please don't forget the power of a physical interaction. A couple of quick models to help you think about how to do that. And I'm going to zip through this one. Maslow introduced this, hierarchy of needs. How many people have seen this? You've all seen it. You took it in your Psychology 101 to get the general ed credit, right? We all know this. We know this framework of where you step back and you really ask yourself, what are the needs that a human has? You know, President Hinckley used to talk about this a lot. He said, it's really difficult for someone to sit and talk about a spiritual matter when they're hungry. Right? He was referring to this model that tells us that we have to meet our physiological, and safety needs before we can start moving up the model. Maslow understood over a couple of decades of this being refined that you don't have to completely satisfy all the needs at the lower levels before you go up, but you need to feel as if you're satisfying most of them. Okay? And so how does this relate to business? Well, most, if not all, experienced business professionals have satisfied these needs, haven't they? I haven't met anybody in my professional career that says, boy, I'm going to wonder where my next meal is coming from. Or I'm not sure where I'm going to sleep tonight, right? Most business professionals have addressed these. But I would submit that there are many business professionals that have yet to satisfy these higher needs. Michael referred to the role I have at the firm around partner development. You want to know the number one question that I'm asked by my partners? What's my purpose? I'm trying to figure out what this life is all about. And it's not just about what I do with my clients. There's something bigger here, and I'm trying to figure it out. What do you think's going on inside when I hear that? I got these two friends. And I was wondering, we have some phenomenal conversations about this whole notion of self-actualization. This is a business principle, ladies and gentlemen. Another framework. This was put out by David Rock. David Rock has done a lot of research around neuroscience and around how the mind reacts to social interaction. It's phenomenal. And there's some great content out there around from the Neuro Leadership Institute on some of these very principles. And the principle is that your mind physiologically reacts to social interaction the same way that it responds to physical interaction. In other words, you view something as either a reward or a threat very quickly in an interaction with another person. And your mind is going through, from a processing perspective, the same way that your mind would go through if a lion jumped out from behind that tree and the whole fight or flight syndrome and you're out of there. Your mind reacts the same way with social threats. It's the same electricity going on inside your mind from a neuroscience perspective. Okay? And so David Rock stepped back and he said, what's the framework to help us navigate through, if that's the reality, that immediately upon meeting somebody, I have this literally an immediate perception of either a reward or a threat. How do I manage that? How do I manage, some people call that emotional intelligence, right? How can you step back from the situation and really think through, how do I manage that interaction so that I don't just jump and fight or flight, right? So we came up with 5 key dimensions, the first of which is status. This is really all about relative importance that you have in yourself compared to a group. How do I feel about me? One of the examples that I like to think about is, how many of you seen National Treasure, the movie National Treasure? Great movie. We're waiting for number 3, aren't we, for like the last how many years? And so in National Treasure, you'll remember that the lead, Ben, Nicolas Cage, and Abigail have to get into the White House. Remember that? Because they got to get to the Resolute desk in order to see if there's some clue at the Resolute desk. Abigail had dated a couple of times this guy that works at the White House, right? I can't remember what his name was, but he was kind of a goofy guy. You remember him? And so they go to the White House. There's this Easter egg hunt going, and Abigail approaches him, and he's like, oh, great, thanks for coming. And then all of a sudden, Ben's there too, and he looks and goes, oh, Ben. And Ben says the following thing. He says, well, go ahead and ask him. And she says, no, he probably can't. It probably wouldn't happen. Yeah, you're probably right. And the guy goes, what do you mean? What do you mean? What are you asking? Well, Ben was wondering if you could get us into the Oval Office. You know, I'm sure that's too much to... No, I can do that. What were they appealing to? Status. You're important. You can get us into the Oval Office. Now, that's a little manipulative, right? But that's what was happening in that scene from that movie, is they were appealing to his status. The second point is certainty. Certainty is really all about being able to predict the future and what will happen in the future. So I want you to think about this. When you are assembled into groups, and you do a lot of group work, don't you, in school? Actually, a better example. Have you ever been in a meeting where it goes over? Hopefully this isn't one of those. What happens if the meeting's supposed to end at 10 and it becomes 10:01? What happens to you? Yeah, you're like, oh man, this is going over. I got something else to do. You're checked out. Because what happened? Your certainty just went down. This was going to happen at 10. What do you mean it's going to end at 10:15? And all of a sudden you view that as a threat. And you emotionally, you're done. You've checked out. Okay, autonomy. Who doesn't want to have autonomy? We heard the term micromanage, right? Think about being in a group setting. Quickest way to counteract autonomy, risk or threats in a group setting, name a leader. What does that do? Give somebody status. Second, allocate work. What does that do? It gives people certainty. And it also gives them status depending upon the nature of what they get, right? And it also, the connection that's established among the group relates to the fourth point, relatedness. Your ability to actually feel a part of something. This happens very quickly as you establish something in common with another person. That will eliminate the threat of relatedness, and it'll turn it into a reward. And there's a lot of great examples of how to do that. One of the easiest ways to do that is to find out where someone's from. Where did they go to school? I'm giving you a bit of a preview for a slide that I'm going to show you how to ask effective questions in order to establish and use this model. Finally, fairness. Fairness is the point of, well, this just feels like there's equity in this interaction. It feels like this is fair. I feel like I'm being dealt with properly. There was a study at UCLA that said that 50 cents could feel more fair than $10 when the 50 cents was out of $1 and the $10 was out of $100. It's a perception. You know, when I was growing up, I used to mow lawns. I remember getting paid for mowing lawns. Emotionally, it felt better to get 10 $1 bills than one $10 bill. Do you remember that? I remember going to my mom saying, hey, can I give you this 10 so I can get 10 ones? Right? It just felt better, didn't it? It felt like like there was fairness. And it wasn't any different, but that's what the studies have shown, right? So In light of those frameworks, what does this mean about establishing emotional connections? People have basic needs. Think about what those needs are and how you're appealing to those needs as you interact with them. Secondly, a person's mind processes that interaction as a threat or a reward. Think about how you can, using that 5-point model, how you can interact with someone and appeal to the reward dimension of the mentality. People make decisions emotionally and then back it up with facts. We talked about that. And then many decisions now are evaluated digitally first, and then in many cases, finally, through a physical interaction, which we've talked about. I would like to ask yourself this question. How would someone describe how they feel when they're with you or around you? Ask yourself that question. That's an important dimension in business. How does someone feel when they're around you? Several years ago, we had an opportunity at one of my key clients that I serve. Project team went, had a great meeting with them. And I got some feedback from the team. They said, well, we talked to some of the lower level folks and they said that the VP just didn't feel like we wanted the work. We had a great presentation, but they just didn't feel like we wanted it. So I called up the VP, who I'd known for several years, and I said, hey, do you have a few minutes tomorrow for me to swing by? He said, absolutely. We spent 30 minutes together and we closed the deal. Because of how he felt. We really want this, Pete. Let me tell you why we really want to do this work. It was how he felt. So let's step back and ask ourselves, how do we show up physically? I'm going to set digital aside for a minute because I'm going to assume it's table stakes with all of you. If it's not, I'd recommend that you ask yourself, how are you showing up digitally, and work on that. But how do you show up physically? Well, dress for it. If I go to Silicon Valley, I generally don't wear a coat. I wear a coat in New York, but I don't in Silicon Valley. I understand who I'm meeting with. Observe your surroundings as soon as you walk into a room. Awards, pictures, and that allows you to establish that connectivity. I remember several years ago, there was a leader at a particular client who was just really difficult to work with, so hard to work with. And I wasn't a partner at the time. This was probably 20 years ago. And the partner asked me, well, we've got to go see this person and get this type of information from them, and you've drawn the short straw, so you go talk to them. And I heard the reputation of this person, and so I entered the office, and I said, you know, we're going to do this differently. I walked into her office. As soon as I walked in, I looked over in the credenza, and I saw a couple pictures of her children. Before she could yell at me, I said, tell me about your son. Oh, by the way, I'm Ron Haas from PwC. Tell me about your son. All of a sudden, this wall went down. And she started telling me about how he loved soccer. Tell me about your daughter. Well, she loves the violin. We were there for 45 minutes. I went back. The partner asked me, how'd it go? Well, our son likes to play soccer. Daughter likes to play violin. What are you talking about? I said, well, now we know her. And now we can do business with her. That's an important dimension, right, of this whole notion of observing your surroundings. Effective questions. We're going to talk about what kind of effective questions, and I'm going to give you some examples of some effective questions that can get to this establishing genuine concern and understanding what needs are of people. Find something you have in common and find it quick. When we moved to Dallas 12 years ago, I started meeting with officers at this client that I was serving, and I found out that they all used the same realtor when they moved to Dallas. Guess who became our realtor? It's the only reason we selected her. I mean, she was good, but that was the primary reason that we selected her. Guess what the first thing is I spoke about with every new officer that I met at that company? Hey, did you use so-and-so? Oh, I did too. All of a sudden, we talked for 15 minutes about moving. And then they started sharing about what was really on their mind. This is about establishing something that's in common. Be distinctive. What makes you you? What helps you stand out from amongst the crowd? Students ask this question all the time. I had one student come up to me after we had talked about some of these principles in an information session. They spoke to me for a few minutes. He took his name tag off and he handed it to me and says, I just don't want you to forget me. And I put it in my pocket, and the next week he had an interview. Now, please, I don't want 120 name tags at the end of this session. That's one way of being distinctive. Michael mentioned we have 8 children. That's kind of distinctive in the world. We send out a Christmas card to about 250 clients every year. About 9 years ago, I had a client who was going through a large transaction and buying another company. It's a $20 billion company down in our neck of the woods. And we met with them, had a great meeting. He said, okay, we'll get back to you. He said, oh, okay. I thought it was a good meeting. What do you mean you're going to get back to us? And so we gave him all this information. We had a great session. About 6 weeks passes, all of a sudden I get a phone call from him right after Christmas. He says, Ron, I want to talk to you about helping us with this, this, and this in connection with this transaction. And this is the general counsel of this company. I said, Stacy was his name. I said, Stacy, thanks so much for thinking of me. At the end of the call, I said that to him. He says, well, Ron, I got your Christmas card, and I saw all those children, and I just thought, boy, I need to give this guy some help. A couple weeks later, the CFO of AT&T approached me after a meeting, and he says, got your Christmas card, and you have a lot of children. I've known that, but boy, you have a lot of children. And he said, how do I know those are all yours? I said, what do you think, I rent them for the picture? He says, I don't know, I'm just asking, right? But it was distinctive. My wife and I will go to social events. She'll meet people from my clients, and they'll say, I've just wanted to meet the mom that I see every year in the Christmas card. Okay? That's something that's distinctive. What's distinctive about you? And then finally, this principle of making it personal, giving it to receive. I want to talk about this. Would you be willing to introduce me to? There's been a lot of research around this, and there's a lot of customer and client satisfaction work done around this. Would you be willing to refer me to a friend or colleague, right? Scale of 1 to 10. One of our competitors has actually done a lot of research on this and has pushed it out. It's called the Net Promoter Score. And it's a great framework and model. The point is why do we send out surveys if merely to get the answer of, yeah, I'd refer you to a friend or colleague? How about we actually ask the question? Would you be willing to refer me to a friend or colleague? I had a CEO that I met with one time several years ago. I said, we've got an opportunity at another company. It's a peer company of yours. It's not doing work that would be competitive, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to send an email to so-and-so, his peer, the CEO at that other company, and introduce me. And perhaps talk about, just share, hey, we had a good experience with this firm and with this partner particularly. And he looked at me and says, you want me to send an email to her? I said, yeah. And he paused for a minute and he said, okay. So he sent the email. The next week we had the meeting with that other CEO. What do you think the first thing she said? Hey, I got this email from Glenn. So let's start talking about what it is you guys are going to actually do because we need to get started. Okay. Asking effective questions. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I want to get you to the actual asking of the questions and what those look like. Find out what's important to them personally. Sometimes I think in business we think, well, business is business and personal is personal. People are people. They're human beings. And once I realized that, yeah, this person has an important role, and he's a lot of notoriety, very important and powerful, but once I realized, I stepped back, they're just a person. They're just trying to do a good job. They're a father just like me. They do this just like me. They're just a person. What's important to them personally? Several years ago, I had a client who I asked the would you be willing question to. I said, I'd love to meet your leadership team. He was the president of a business unit. And he said, I'll tell you what, Ron, why don't I have a lunch and I'll invite all of my leaders to this lunch and you'll have a chance to meet them. I said, that would be great. So we got together for lunch and he went around the table and had every one of them introduce themselves to me. And I don't know how we got on the subject of what is your definition of success, but all of a sudden, as we went around, everyone was given their definition of success. When we got to the business unit president, his name is Jose Gutierrez from Madrid. And he said, my definition of success with this really strong Spanish accent, he said, is to drive around in a Jeep with the top down. And all of his leaders looked at him like, what are you talking about? And he went on to elaborate about how that would just bring peace to him and how he was seeking peace in his life. Remember that hierarchy of needs, right? He was working on the top, self-actualization. I went back to the office. I had my assistant order a little Jeep about this big. And I made sure it had a top that could go down. We ordered it, sent it over to him with a handwritten note that said, Jose, thanks for the lunch. Here's to driving around in your Jeep with the top down. He sent me a text about a month ago. He's been retired for about 4 years now from his home office. He says, he took a picture of the Jeep. He says, I'm still thinking of this, my friend. He was a great client. I took my boss to meet him one time on purpose. And he took her over to the credenza and said, look at this Jeep. He was so proud of the Jeep. And he said, Ron has been the best consultant I've ever worked with. I said, keep telling her that, right? Because there was something that was important to him and it was personal, and I made it personal. So, what are some questions? Here's some examples. If you want a copy of this, connect with me on LinkedIn and we'll get a copy of it to you. These are just examples of ways in which you can establish an emotional connection with someone by asking an effective question. Where do you live in town? This is an easy question. Now, you got to ask these questions at the right time and place with the right tone, okay? But the point is try it. Ask it. See what happens. You know, how many return missionaries in here? Okay? How many of you heard the phrase, we teach people, not lessons? Right? Isn't that really what we're talking about? Isn't that stepping back and really understanding the person first and then sharing whatever message you have? And that message may be, hey, we're really good at cybersecurity, or we can really help you with the supply chain solution, or you know what, we can help you enter this new market and figure out if it should be Germany or France. People don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's what these effective questions do, is they give you an opportunity to get underneath the person and what's important to them. Just a final point about this last one. What's working well in your organization now that you'd like to see done more frequently? So many times in business, we want to find the problem because we want to try and be problem solvers, right? But the process that we follow to find those problems tends to sound like this in people's minds. I can help you be better by doing less of what you don't do well. Well, who's going to listen to you after you say something like that? How about flip it and say, I can help you be better by doing more of what you do well. What do you do well that you would like to scale in this organization and to be better at? It's just a different way of using the words, but it appeals to status. It appeals to autonomy. It gives them certainty. All those things that we were talking about on that framework. So plan how you'll ask these and then execute on your plan. So a couple of key points, just in conclusion, and then we'll take a couple of questions. This relates to you. So if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, so what does this mean for me seeking an internship or a full-time position opportunity? The same thing applies. What's your digital presence and brand? Show up before you show up. That's a very important principle, and we've talked about that. Know what a potential employer is looking for in the buying decision. What are they buying? They're buying you. They're buying your ideas, your thoughts, your aspirations. That's what companies do. They take ideas and monetize those ideas. What are your ideas? What's important to them? How are they going to go about making that decision? Okay? Ask those questions. What's the structure of the interview? How could I best prepare for that? And so forth. I would encourage you with behavioral-based interviews, or really everyone's doing them now, is have a series of questions that help somebody understand how good you are at being proactive, how good you are at organizing things, being a critical thinker, challenging the status quo, thinking of new ways of working, etc. Establishing positive impressions. You've heard the statistics. Somebody makes a conclusion about you within the first few seconds of meeting you. Think about how you show up. Look at yourself in the mirror. Practice it in the mirror. I do that all the time. The number of times that we practice before we go to a meeting, it would surprise you? I hope it wouldn't. We practice before we show up. Ask those effective questions that appeal to human needs. Do I have needs? Absolutely, right? Connecting with people in a way that establishes an emotional connection and recognizes those needs will help you as you seek internships and opportunities. Find something you have in common with them. I met someone recently, a couple of weeks ago out here, that grew up in the same place as my wife and went to the same high school. What do you think happened emotionally to me when I found that out with that interaction? All of a sudden it was, hey, tell me more. And he wanted to know more. Okay? And then finally, what makes you distinctive? What makes you different? Why will that person remember you as opposed to anyone else? And make it personal. Don't be afraid to make it personal. Well, so a couple of final things. I'm just going to keep these up here. I hope that you've gotten from this a couple of things. One is we can't ignore digital. Your digital presence is important. I want you to think about and plan and be deliberate around how you show up physically. Ask the questions that allow you to connect with someone emotionally and appreciate and exercise empathy for them. And then just a couple of final principles that you can look at. But let me pause for a minute. One key point. You're the brand of this place. That's a really important principle. You're the brand of BYU. Wherever you go, whatever you do, you'll be affiliated with this institution and all that it stands for. You are a walking example of the mission and purpose of this school. And by extension, its sponsoring organization, the church. You're the brand. Remember how you show up digitally, how you show up physically. You can make a great influence in the lives of other people if you just step back and be a little bit more methodical about how you do that. Don't spend so much time looking down. Spend a lot of time looking up. Questions? Yes?
So the CEO of LinkedIn, I think his name is Jeff Wagner, I believe, has talked a lot about how soft skills is one of the big skills aspects of the I'm just curious, from your perspective, what's your favorite question to ask and anything that you mentioned back?
So, depending upon the arena, observe the surroundings very quickly, because that could generate the question. The example I gave about tell me about your son, right? So I would observe your surroundings very quickly. If you're not in kind of on their home field, so you don't have that benefit, sometimes it could be something they're carrying. It could be a class ring. It could be, there's lots of, so I think my first response to that would be very observant of what's happening around you. And then I think a real valid question that if there isn't a lot of kind of physical things to observe, it's just something like, hey, tell me where you grew up. Where'd you grow up? Or if you don't feel like you're quite ready to experience that, you could say something like, boy, I understand you've been here at this company for 15 years, and you were at some of these other companies. Tell me, what was your favorite role, and why? People love talking about their experiences. So I think there's you could ask any one of those effective questions, and you'll strike a chord with it. Yes?
Would you rather have a candidate hired who aces the case interview, does really well on all the numbers, or someone who connects with you personally and has common ground with you and asks effective questions?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I would go back. Here's my answer to that. The case study, all the technical skills are table stakes. If you don't have them, you're not going to get the opportunity to do these other things we're talking about. Okay? Because I want to make sure when you leave the room that you don't feel like, well, Ron said that technical competency is not as important as the soft skill gap. That's not what I'm saying. The reason there's a soft skill gap is because the market realizes that there is a basic minimum required level of capability that everyone's expected to achieve, right? So you're graduating from BYU. I'm going to expect that you're going to know what gross margin is, as an example, right? But I've had students in case interviews that didn't know, and they were juniors, right? So, they didn't have table stakes. So once you get past that, it's kind of you bake the cake, all this other stuff's frosting. You got to have the cake in order to then lay frosting on top of it. And it's that frosting that will end up closing the deal for you. So both are important. Yes?
One more question.
Okay.
Okay.
So I noticed that you're very confident instructor. So I know what helped you develop in your career, develop such a strong confidence.
I'll tell you, this goes back to my mission. I have used what I learned on my mission every single day since I left the mission field. You think about it, I spend most of my time right now finding opportunities for us as a firm to help clients with their challenges. What does that sound like to you? Trying to build a teaching pool, right? That's what I spend most of my day doing. is trying to build a teaching pool. Now I think about this role that I have now with partner development. What is that doing? Helping people find purpose, right? What I love about BYU is the interconnected nature of temporal and spiritual learning and bringing those together. If you can understand the relationship between those two, then you're becoming the whole person. All right. Hey, I look forward to seeing you all soon, and thank you so much for coming and your engagement.